Leanne Maskell, who's a qualified ADHD coach, author, founder of the training company ADHD Works. Leanne, thank you for joining us this morning. Good morning to you.
Hey, good morning. Thank you for having me.
Morning. Tell us a bit about your situation and your story when it comes to ADHD first off.
So I was diagnosed when I was 25 years old, so about 6 years ago now. And I basically got a law degree from university, so I never really struggled at school with academics in terms of exams. But I really, really struggled with friendships. I was extremely depressed throughout my childhood. I couldn't concentrate in classes. So when I got all A's in my exams, my teacher asked if I'd cheated. She asked the whole class if I'd cheated because she said that's not possible, that Leanne's got good exam results. So when I graduated from university, I wasn't sure how to actually put this into practice. I could pass an exam, but it just felt like my brain was on fire all the time. And I kept moving country. I kept arguing with all of my friends and family. If I managed to get a job, I would quit it within a few days. So I just thought I was basically completely crazy and went to doctors who told me that I was fine. They said, you've got a law degree, there's nothing wrong with you. But I knew that things were, and things got worse and worse. And I basically ended up becoming quite suicidal. And luckily managed to see a professional psychiatrist. But it was only because things had become so bad that I didn't think that I would end up being here anymore if I didn't get some kind of help. But I didn't know that what I was experiencing was ADHD. I thought it was lots of other things that I found on Google. And he said, no, you've got ADHD. And from that point, my life completely changed because it was like someone had given me the keys to understanding how my brain worked, and I could stop beating myself up for not being able to fit into like normal society and start figuring out what worked for me instead. And now, as you just mentioned, like I've kind of written 4 books and trained companies like Disney and Google and do all of these amazing things, but it was really key for me to have that understanding and someone to help me. So I think what you're doing is really important here, sharing and raising awareness.
Well, thank you. And I know by the sounds of it, you've been through quite a difficult journey, but you're now using that for good to help others as well. How would you kind of sum up the place that we're in terms of diagnosis and understanding all that kind of stuff at the moment? Is it getting better?
I think it's getting worse. I spoke to the World Health Organization 2 years ago about this because when I became an ADHD coach, I was inundated from people that wanted help, and they were on 7-year waiting lists for the NHS. Like, I couldn't believe it myself. And that is why I wrote this book called ADHD and A to Z to try and help, because that assessment and the diagnosis, it doesn't actually change your life that much if you already know that what you're experiencing is ADHD. So a lot of the people that are on these waiting lists, they know that they have ADHD. And so when they get diagnosed, not that much will practically change for them. Anyway, like it did with me because I had no idea what it was I was struggling with. And because of the increase in awareness and the pandemic, and it changed the way that everyone lived, we could all understand that maybe things weren't right. And social media has meant there's a lot more awareness and education about things like ADHD in women and how that can present. And so now we're in the situation where people are actually just being cut off from even being able to access an assessment in some parts of the country, unless they are at crisis point, unless they're suicidal, which obviously is just going to drive more people to those situations before they can get help. But I think it's really bad because even once you get that diagnosis, there's not much support available. Right now in the UK, we're experiencing national medication shortages. So I can't even get my ADHD medication. So it's that thing of like, if you understand that what you're experiencing is something like ADHD, that's great. And you can start doing things now to work with your brain instead of waiting for that label from a psychiatrist. But I think that the government has got a really important duty to increase support for people before and after diagnosis. And I actually led a petition that got 11,000 signatures, and the government essentially said that wasn't their problem. But it obviously is their problem because there are so many people desperate for support and that need that help, and they have nowhere to go.
So in your mind then, what would immediately improve some of those issues that you've just highlighted there? What needs to change?
I think access to support. There's a really great scheme actually from the government called the Access to Work scheme. And that can pay for anyone with a health condition that affects them at work to get support. So it's up to £65,000 a year. It can be things like ADHD coaching or like any kind of coaching for any kind of health condition like chronic fatigue syndrome. So that's really amazing, but increasing awareness about that, I believe it's only about 1% of people that could use it. And when we see the number of people that are struggling to work because of health, like that's an obvious solution, but we don't really hear about that very much. I think increased training of GPs and teachers and in the workplace is really important, again, because like the access to work scheme I just mentioned, the law doesn't say that you have to have a formal diagnosis to be able to access support. Like I had ADHD before I was diagnosed with it. I just knew about it then. So even within the workplace, if managers, for example, understand how to help people with ADHD, how to make really simple adjustments, that can mean that they basically can thrive within their jobs instead of being made to quit, essentially. And the suicide rate is really high. There's a 5 times higher risk of people attempting to end their life with ADHD. And so it's really, really important that it's taken seriously. And right now, I think we're in a culture where the actual stigma is against ADHD being a trend. So now if people are seeking support, they're being stigmatized for it, particularly women who in the past might have been called emotional or dramatic or attention seeking. And now they're still being called these things just under a different umbrella. And it's not their fault that the system is broken. But I think maybe making access to that support and education awareness and then turning that into action. So it's like, okay, if you're diagnosed or you think you have ADHD, like what you actually do with that. And I think increasing access to support with things like coaching is really helpful for people to be able to make use of that and understand how to work with their brains.
Yeah, and I've got to go to the travel in just a second, but one last point I wanted to ask, and I sort of touched on this with Lauren as well, but are the symptoms, the signs quite different then for women and girls? What sort of things should people be looking out for if people are listening to this and they're worried or they want a bit more information? What's been your experience on that side of things? How it might present, how it might be different if you're a woman?
Yeah, extremely different. So ADHD is connected with a 30% developmental delay in executive functioning skills. So these are things like self-awareness. For example, women might not be aware of how much they're taking on and they might burn out. I very commonly see kind of people-pleasing syndromes, taking on so much work, doing everything for everyone else until they kind of pop. Whereas in a man, that might more emerge as like interrupting people or like being very physically outwardly hyperactive, but not really being so aware of how you're coming across. Whereas I think women are conditioned to be like quiet and agreeable and to say yes to everything. And another one is emotional regulation. So there's something called rejection sensitive dysphoria, this experience of intense emotional pain associated with real or perceived rejection. And that can cause very severe mood swings that last for quite a fairly short, limited period of time. But that connected with something like impulsivity is what leads, for example, 1 in 4 women with ADHD have attempted to take their own life. Like, because if you're experiencing this very, very intense emotions, and it really is from having a life where you have felt like you're doing everything wrong, it's that struggle to do what you know that you need to do, and struggling to just keep up in all areas of your life and feeling like that is your fault somehow. And you're trying all of these solutions. But very often people with ADHD, they've tried every single to-do list, planner, etc., strategy out there, but they still seem to be overwhelmed. And I think there's that aspect of having a brain that just feels like it will not shut up. And I didn't realize that wasn't normal until I took medication. And I had a real epiphany at seeing that other people don't live with like 250 channels at the same time.
It's really interesting talking to you, Leanne. Thank you very much for coming on. That's Leanne Maskell, who's a qualified ADHD coach, author, founder of training company ADHD Works. If you're listening, this has impacted you in some way or someone in your family, you want to talk about the support that you got after your diagnosis or the wait for that diagnosis in the